Hi everyone, my name is Cristina Rocha and I'm an Associate Professor at the Religion and Society Research Center here at UWS. I'm an anthropologist and throughout my career I used ethnography as a way of understanding the people I was studying. I conducted ethnography in Japan. I was studying at tea ceremony school in Kyoto, and in Brazil, where I researched a Zen Buddhist temple where Japanese migrants and Brazilians practice Buddhism. I was interested in how each community understood Buddhism in different ways and the conflicts that arose because of that. I also conducted ethnography in Australia, where I researched the Australian followers of a Brazilian faith healer called John of God. Ethnography is a qualitative method which you use when you want a detailed, in-depth description of and analysis of people's behavior in everyday life and their cultural patterns. Ethnography is both a qualitative research method, that is, one conducts an ethnography, a research, and also a product, the outcome of the research, that is, the book, the report, or the article in which you publish your analysis of what you observed. Ethnography was first pioneered in the 19th century by anthropologists. Anthropology emerged alongside European colonialism, so historically, anthropologists studied communities in faraway, exotic places such as indigenous peoples in Africa, in the Americas, in Australia, in Polynesia and Melanesia, and so forth and so on. In order to study these peoples, anthropologists devised the ethnographic method. They thought that if they were to understand these peoples, they should live with them for a long period of time so that they could learn their language, they could learn their customs, their culture. They called this participant observation, and here you see that there are two roles for the ethnographer. First, the ethnographer participates in the life of the group or community she is studying, but also the ethnographer maintains some kind of detachment as an observer. Anthropologists were interested in the logic behind what these natives did. The question was, why do they do things the way they do? As humans, we all speak, sleep, eat, have relationships, we dress, we decorate our bodies, we get sick and die. What anthropologists realized is that different groups of people did these universal human things in different ways. But there was a logic also behind this. What they did was very rational, as much as what we do is very rational. We all sleep, but why is it that some people sleep in separate beds and other communities sleep together? Or why is it that some sleep in hammocks and others on the ground? Why do we decorate our bodies in different ways? How do different societies deal with sickness and death? But what's special about anthropology is that historically, they realized that instead of imposing the ethnographer's explanation for these differences onto the people they were studying, anthropologists were interested in what we call the emic perspective, or the insider's point of view. That is, how the natives, as they called at that time, understood and explained their own world. That is very different from the ethic perspective, that is the perspective of the researcher, the outsider. Another important point is that when we start conducting ethnography with a new community, everything is very foreign and strange. But the more you learn about the new culture, the more this culture becomes familiar to you. At the same time, your own culture becomes unfamiliar or exotic to you. By learning about other people's customs and society through the ethnographic method, we can think more reflexively about our own society. We can understand our own society much better. We call this making the exotic familiar and the familiar exotic. For example, think of what happens when you travel overseas. Everything is so strange and it seems that you're always lost, doing the wrong thing. And at every turn you think of the ways you do things in Australia. But in time, all these strange customs become normal to you. And if you stay overseas too long, when you come back to Australia, things become a bit strange. You have to sort of relearn the things the Australian way. For instance, my first field work was in Japan, and when I arrived there, I was lost all the time. Even though I spoke the language, everything was so different and so strange that, I was always doing the wrong thing. And there was one day, I remember really well, I sat down on a tatami mat, one of those straw mats they have in Japan, with a group of people, and I sat cross-legged. And the moment I did that, everybody looked at me, and I knew I had done something terribly wrong. So I looked at the women, and I realized that only men were sitting cross-legged, and the women were all sitting sideways with their legs to the side, and that's what I did immediately. But then I made a mental note, thinking, so what does sitting have to do with the roles, the gender roles here in Japan? So these kind of things are important, like you start learning with your body when you are doing ethnography. The pioneer of the ethnographic method was Bronislaw Malinowski, who lived between 1884 and 1942. He was a British anthropologist born in Poland and one of the most important 20th century anthropologists. He studied the Trobriand Islanders from eastern Papua New Guinea. He lived among them, learned their language, their social organization and customs. After he went back to England, he used his experience and his field notes to write a book called Argonauts of the Western Pacific, in which he brings the point of view of the natives to his readers. And this book has become a classic of anthropology now. Nowadays, anthropologists conduct research not only with people in distant places, but also within their own societies. They seek to learn about the culture of different institutions. For example, the culture of corporations, the culture of hospitals. How do doctors relate to nurses, or how do doctors relate to patients? What happens there in everyday life in hospitals? They can also research the culture of the military, for example. What are the gender roles in the military? What are the power, how is power distributed within the military? They can also do research in different communities. For example, communities of migrants, religious peoples, the elderly, youth subcultures. Or you can do research, for example, on hipsters. Why is it that suddenly we see all these people wearing beards, men wearing beards and old glasses, 1950 glasses, and this is all over the world. You travel all over the world, you see that in big cities. You could start thinking of that and do ethnography in the globalization of hipster culture, for example. In the past decades, other disciplines have also adopted the ethnographic method. Sociology, culture studies, religious studies, media studies. Each of these disciplines share an interest in human societies and skepticism towards common sense account of social phenomena. They suggest that there are things happening behind our backs, so to speak, and it's the task of social scientists to make sense of them. You can use ethnography to make sense of these disciplines and social phenomena.